am really happy to be moderating today's panel about SpectrumX, which is the first National Science Foundation Spectrum Innovation Center. And so we have, I have two of my colleagues here from basically SpectrumX. Scott Palo is going to be talking just sort of overall about really SpectrumX and talking about some of their broadening participation initiatives. And then Anja Fourie is going to be speaking about some of the workforce development efforts there. And so I'll start by introducing, and just as a side point, I serve as a policy consultant specifically to SpectrumX and have really enjoyed having this new work in partnership together with really the academic community, which is fairly new for me. So starting first with Scott. Scott is the Charles Victor Schelke Endowed Professor of Aerospace Engineering at the University of Colorado-Boulder. He has more than 20 years of experience in higher education, is the director of the Space Technology Integration Lab, and former Associate Dean for Research in the College of Engineering and Applied Science. Dr. Palo is a recent fellow of basically AIAA, and as in, that is why he's in DC this week, to basically be honored with that fellow. And then he is also a senior member of basically IEEE and a member of the Commercial Small Satellite Spectrum Managers Association. Since September of 2021, Dr. Palo took his has been serving as the Associate Director of SpectrumX. Anja Fourie is the Project Director of Broader Impacts at the National Radio Astronomy Observatory and serves as SpectrumX Director on Education and Workforce Development. Anja started her 20-year career in science engagement as a science journalist in South Africa, but quickly moved into project management of science engagement programs. Anja has project managed just about everything, including public outreach efforts for the Square Kilometre Array radio telescope in South Africa. And Anja now leads broader impacts for basically NRAO and its proposed next generation very large array telescope, where she is pleased to work where astronomy, project management, and broader impacts meet. Welcome to both of you, and I'll start here with Scott. Sure.
All right. So I'll stand up here so I can see the slides as I'm talking. So great. I want to thank you all for inviting me here today and Renee to participate in the panel. It's a pleasure to be here. As you heard, I'm a faculty member in Aerospace Engineering Sciences and have been doing work around the radio spectrum for the past 20 years, largely started with ground-based remote sensing of the upper atmosphere using radar. About 20 years ago, got into building small satellites with students and needed to work with radio spectrum there. And then most recently with SpectrumX that I want to talk with you about today. Okay, next slide. So this is the big picture of what SpectrumX is. So I did want to ask, who here in the room is familiar with SpectrumX? Okay, well, I want to say there's more of you in the room familiar with SpectrumX than I was about NSMA. Until Renee invited me, I was not familiar with NMSA. However, as my bio indicated, I have been involved for the past 5 or 6 years with the Commercial Small Sat Spectrum Managers Association. So I assume there are some similarities in terms of the organizational goals there. But with regards to that, so SpectrumX is the National Science Foundation Spectrum Innovation Center. We're stood up about 18 months ago. So we're a 5-year cooperative researcher grant with the National Science Foundation that provides support to get the center up and running. You may have heard the National Science Foundation tagline, America's Seed Fund. I look at this as seed funding. If you come from an entrepreneurial perspective, we're trying to take this investment, grow it, build partnerships so that the organization will persist and thrive beyond the arc of the support of the National Science Foundation. So We do have about $5 million a year in funding to support all of the goals that we have for the center. We have 27 universities involved in SpectrumX, a combination of what you refer to as Research 1 or R1 universities shown up on the map there across the country. It might be a little bit hard to read all the details. In addition to a number of minority serving institutions. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. But one of our key goals, in addition to fundamentally doing research on the radio spectrum, spectrum sharing opportunities, looking at how do we use data, how do we use sensing in the radio spectrum environment to move towards the next generation of spectrum management. We're also looking at how do we engage and bring in the next generation of students and broaden participation and making that pathway and that aperture open to more students. And then the lead institution is Notre Dame, and you probably heard when Mr. Harris was speaking that there was an NTI listening session at Notre Dame. So that was sponsored by SpectrumX. We've had a busy couple of months. In addition to that, I think you may have heard Ira Keltz mention Spectrum Week at the National Science Foundation. So SpectrumX was responsible for a significant portion of the organization of that event, and looking again to coordinate that with the National Science Foundation next year as well. Next slide, please. So this kind of gives you an acronym soup of the spectrum ecosystem. You may be familiar with some of the acronyms. You may not be familiar with other ones, but the basic picture here is that this spectrum management environment really was maybe not accessible to academics in any reasonable way. There were lots of hubs here, whether it's commercial, whether it's within the federal government, or otherwise to engage. And so really what SpectrumX is envisioned as is a academic hub to work on research, but to also work on growing workforce, and in addition, engage in policy education. So again, I'll talk a little bit. We do have a policy working group. Our goal is not policy advocacy. Our goal is to inform about policy and to provide a conduit for academics to engage in policy discussions, and for policymakers to engage with the academics and the members of academia that are doing interesting research. So we have an organizational structure that I can mention a little bit more in just a minute here, but we have sort of core areas, one in research, as you would expect, one in broadening participation, one in education, one in policy, and then a final one in collaboration, which is really building our industry and federal partnerships. Next slide, please. So this is our high-level mission statement, and you can see, over on the right, sort of the core research and working education workforce development with collaboration, broadening participation, and policy. And what we want to do is serve as an exclusive, interdisciplinary, and innovative community for all radio spectrum stakeholders across industry, government agencies, and academia. So we're trying to bring the community together. We understand we can't be unbiased. None of us are unbiased. We all bring our own baggage and perspectives. Our goal is to be equally biased. So to hear those voices and bring those people together to discuss and work on some of these thorny problems to the extent we can. Next slide, please. So this just gives you an idea of some of the stakeholders and the idea of where we want to head into the future, right? This idea of having more sensing, more continuous, ubiquitous sensing, bringing data into the conversation and having tools to enable us to use data from many different dimensions, not just sensors out in the field, but economic data, regulatory data to help inform and making decisions. Okay, next slide, please. And so we've got 6 center goals. I just wanted to highlight 2 of them here briefly as we move forward. So we want to attract, engage, and prepare diverse students from middle schools through postgraduate levels to pursue meaningful careers in the future Spectrum workforce. So Anja will talk a little bit more about what we're doing in that space. But we also want to grow intercultural competencies throughout the center and broaden participation of underrepresented groups in all center activities. So we know that having decision makers and people at the table with different life experiences, different perspectives, makes for more robust decision making. And so part of our goal is to help expand and reach out and move where we are to be more open and welcoming and to understand those communities so that we can connect and have them engage with us and all move forward together. Next slide, please. So within our broadening participation efforts, we have 3 core tracks that I'll just mention briefly. We have this idea of intercultural competency assessment, so assessing who we are and where we are on our intercultural journey. Trying to have a broader education, diversify the pathway of the students coming in, and then broadening participation with minority serving institutions. Okay, next slide, please. So the intercultural competency assessment is an interesting process. I've gone through this recently, and we go through, and it's trying to assess where you are in your journey and your understanding of engaging with other cultures and the types of perspectives they bring in. Some of the implicit social constructs that we all build up as part of our lived experiences, and trying to open up our perspectives to be able to connect more readily with those students from communities we may be less familiar with. And so the more we can do to be open and accepting, the better chance we will have of partnering with those students in our engagement. We can't just expect that we're gonna say, hey, come and join us in this journey and we're gonna go and learn more about Spectrum. We have to work to move ourselves towards the place that these students and other communities are coming from. Next slide, please. So we have a range of ongoing activities, and I think it's been really interesting. I've participated in a number of these, and I feel like personally, I have learned and grown from some of these seminars. We've had a great team at the University of Colorado-Boulder who's helped support this, and it's open to all members of the center, and we've gotten great feedback from these activities. Next slide. And additionally to those seminars, this is some of the things we're trying to do across the board within the center to grow our intercultural competencies. And so we have some reading circles, we have some online tools, and so this is to enable people to embark on their own personal journey as they feel comfortable. So next slide. And I'll just jump across this one because I think Anja will talk more about that. I just want to point out one last point here is that we have an interesting ongoing project with 4 minority serving universities where we've provided them with smartphones, and each one they have smartphones from 3 different carriers, and they have an app on the smartphone to look at connectivity. And so those students have been mapping their campuses and have been now becoming more aware of the radio spectrum and become more interested in learning more about that and starting to pursue potential engagements, future education opportunities there. So it's the start of building a relationship where we can get some students thinking about this and then moving them forward. And then next slide. This just gives you a headshot of all the members of SpectrumX, the current faculty members we have involved. And so we have a great team. A number of our members have spent time both at the FCC and the NTIA and bring some unique perspectives to the team. And happy to talk more about that and talk about research in a sidebar or a separate opportunity. Okay, next slide, which is my last slide. If you want to learn more about SpectrumX or get involved, you can find our information. The website's www.spectrumx.org. We also have a LinkedIn site where we post information about what's going on in the center, job opportunities. So if any of you are looking at hiring and looking for applicants, please let us know. We're happy to push that out. We've pushed out some recent NTIA job opportunities. So with that, I will yield the floor to Anja.
Thank you very much, Scott. And this is the first opportunity I have to say to Scott, congratulations on your fellowship. We're very, very proud of you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to Renee and thank you to NSMA for this opportunity to talk to you about the SpectrumX education and workforce development efforts. In all the work that I have done in terms of science engagement, especially when I started working in astronomy, specifically at the Square Kilometre Array Radio Telescope in South Africa, it became very apparent to us very quickly that when we were working with, learners who came straight out of grade 12, there was very often, or, even sometimes second year, undergraduate students, we would have students who vaguely remembered sort of this image of the spectrum. They remembered, doing the visible spectrum, but very, very, very few of them could really remember anything about radio spectrum. And, then working with educators in this field sort of for the last 8 to 10 years, really sort of being able to build up this understanding of how difficult it is for not just educators, at high school level, but also, undergraduate and often graduate faculty to be able to teach spectrum, not just in terms of theory, but also, relevance, as well as getting hands-on practice. So it's been a great privilege and a great adventure for me to be involved in this work with SpectrumX. So just to give you a little bit of an overview of our vision and our mission, as Scott was saying, when SpectrumX was formed about 18 months ago, we kicked off 18 months ago, it was, this incredible partnership of not just R1 institutions, but also a group of 14 minority serving institutions that the National Radio Astronomy Observatory had walked a path with, specifically within skills development for data science for astronomy. But it was such a natural fit to be able to bring these minority serving institutions to the work that we were doing, purely because minority serving institutions are the specialists, when it comes to really being able to not just recruit, but also to train, retain students, and also, ensure that students of color, are successful and enter the workforce. So the vision and the mission that I'm sharing with you today was very much a collaborative effort that was designed, with the 27 institutions within this partnership. And because we are funded by the National Science Foundation, the vision for our education and workforce development work is aligned with that of the National Science Foundation. And that is that we want to create a diverse and competitive STEM workforce, but very importantly, that workforce has skills which are transferable in a workplace which dramatically changed over the last 3 years, but also continues to change dramatically. I think, the chat GPT, my students are teaching me now, this workplace is changing very quickly, and we need to make sure our students, keep up with that. But really our mission over the next 5 years was to create this network of diverse partners, coming from across, really the spectrum, that look at education for spectrum in very innovative ways, in order for us to be able to identify students, who have talent, be able to recruit them, train them, but keep them as well, within institutions, and make sure that we accelerate their process preferably into graduate school, and then on into the, into the Spectrum workforce. So that's our mission over the next 5 years. And what we did was, as I said, to take a collaborative design aspect or stance to this, and we pulled together different players in the field, and we started by looking at, okay, if when we look at this field of spectrum management, what are the knowledge and skills required? So just before the proposal, as well as after the submission of our proposal, did industry surveys in terms of what is it that industry needs when somebody walks into their door. Looked at open positions, across various platforms to look at what the requirements were. And then, of course, also looking at a role, if these are the skills and knowledge required, do we really have the training material, or is the training material out there to be able to provide these sort of entry-level skills? So that was the one half of the work we did. The other half was to really sit down for extended periods of time, with minority serving institution students, both at high school level and undergraduate level, their educators, as well as their faculty, to say, what are the barriers to entry for you and persisting at R1 institutions, for example, or being successful or entering the Spectrum workforce? What is stopping you from doing that? We did a lot of in-depth literature reviews, not just one, plenty of those, to sort of look at exploring those barriers as well. And then use the information that we got from all of this to design a Spectrum education and workforce development plan. And I know this, looks like a very busy highway, which is really the point. Because what we wanted to do was to provide students at different levels with both on-ramps and off-ramps into Spectrum. We don't believe that if you enter the Spectrum, for example, the research journey in high school, that you have to get off only, for example, when you end up working for NASA. We want you to be able to go on this journey and take that path, and that might mean taking an off-ramp somewhere. So at the bottom, you will see the different phases, as well as in those 4 blocks. And then just positioned, in those different 4 blocks, you will see the different programs and how they allow each of those groups really to have an on-ramp into into Spectrum research, and an off-ramp if that is what they should choose. But, applying a project management focus to that, what we identified in terms of solutions after the research that we did with our end users essentially were 5 pillars for education and workforce development. The first being curriculum. So really starting at middle school and high school level to help educators to teach the radio spectrum in a hands-on way, which is so just impossible for some of them. They just really, have struggled with how to do that. Looking at, undergraduate courses, that would allow students, and this is a very big focus for us as well, students from different fields. So not just engineering, not just physics, but also economics, politics, to education even, to work in spectrum management. And what would be at an undergraduate level what students need to be able to do that if they left at an undergrad, after their undergraduate degree. And then also in a master's level, if somebody is doing a master's in public policy, or they're an economics a master's student, what is it that we would need to be able to provide that student for them to have a solid introduction to spectrum management and perhaps go into the field? Research and training. I imagine many of you sitting in the room will know that there is a big call for, this workforce, but we want to make sure that that workforce not only has some sort of research experience, but also training, hands-on training experiences. So this is by far the biggest part of the work that we do, looking at an exchange program, between the R1 and the minority serving institutions, fellowships at the Olin Science of College and Engineering, a summer school specifically for member institution students, quite an extensive REU program funded by the National Science Foundation, and then also a graduate fellows program. But in addition, there are certain support structures that are required for students as well as their mentors. The first is to make sure that students not just have their senior mentor, but we actually look at a tiered mentoring model where each student that is funded by us not only gets a supervisor, but also a near to peer, as well as a peer or a cohort mentor, and that those mentors go through very strict training specifically on how to work with students from historically marginalized groups. And that is done for us by the University of California, Santa Cruz. Professional development, being able to provide role models. And this was, again, something we heard loud and clear in the SpectrumX or in Spectrum Week last week, was our students saying to us, we need role models who look like us, who come from similar backgrounds. So programs that will provide that kind of role modeling. And then an individual development plan. If we have a student coming into a summer experience, there may be basic skills that that student is going to need in order to be able to do their summer project. Or if there is a very specific path that they are on in terms of their professional career or field that they want to go into, what are the skills, what are the training courses that they would need to have completed by the time that they leave university. And then outreach, spreading the word. Firstly, what is Spectrum? Starting with the basics. The value of Spectrum, the fact that it's a finite resource, the role that it plays in our daily lives, careers that are available in Spectrum. If I say to students still, spectrum management, none of them really know what I mean. So it's very important for us to do outreach, and the focus for education and workforce development from SpectrumX side is to go to the home communities of our students from historically marginalized groups to tell their communities why it's important that students study STEM, why it's important that they're allowed to, work in Spectrum, what it has, the doors that have been opened for that student, and also the role it plays in that community, to have a student, who has graduated college in STEM and is working in STEM, and what it means for the economic development of their hometown. And then on a citizen science project where we are using RTS, SRD, SDRs, apologies, to do monitoring of Spectrum. That is actually being done by NRDZ, and then we will be working with Radio-Hound to actually expand, as well as roll that out to the public. So those are the 5 pillars. This is just a quick overview of what has been accomplished in the last 18 months. Last year in the summer, we hosted an Educator residency with 10 teachers selected from across the country. Put them into, essentially like a Spectrum bootcamp for 10 weeks. And at the end of those 10 weeks, asked them to develop, 10 hands-on lessons that could be used in classrooms to be able to, to teach their learners about the Spectrum. They were very excited about their work that they'd done. They were doing, in fact, we then got 20 lesson plans, which, nobody's complaining about. Those are all now in prototyping and standards alignment phases, and we will be rolling those out into classrooms in the new academic year. The master's level courses, again, we have really looked at what it is that our end users require. And one of the biggest areas of, points of feedback that we received from students as well as minority serving institutions was accessibility of master's levels courses, as well as the accessibility of the content of master's level courses. And so, we are working on 3 courses at the moment, which will be the equivalent of 1 university master's credit course. Now, what we have decided to do is to put those online on Coursera. And so the different institutions that belong to SpectrumX, will obviously get these courses for free for a limited number of students. And institutions can decide whether they want to use those courses for credit if they have a teacher of record at their institution. or they can use them as non-credit courses, as a certificate, or students, can decide to go onto Coursera and do this for self-study. One of the gatekeepers that was actually identified by students was often faculty. So there may be students who are actually very interested in this material, but because it's not part of their coursework, they will never get, to be able to do this. And that's why we want to allow for self-study as well. As I said, it's free to a limited number of SpectrumX institution students, but for any other students at institutions, $49 for the course certificate, and really just that business model. The little money that is made will really be split between Coursera and SpectrumX and be used for, in the development of additional courses. I've already talked to you a little bit about how we developed that process. So sort of looking at the landscape analysis, what the offerings and the roadmaps were, intensive ideation after we had done that, those needs assessments. We've done extensive outreach presentations to the community. And on that note, what I do want to say to you is if we have not reached out to you, or if you have not, had a chance to look at our courses that are, or work with us in education and workforce development, please do. We've sent out the initial proposals for faculty developers, and we are now at the stage where we have started learning design, supported by Notre Dame Learning. And in really looking at what is required, these are the 3 courses, so radio systems and applications, spectrum regulation and policy, and then valuing and allocating spectrum. And as I said earlier, the intention is not to provide specializations for students. The intention is really for, what is it that if we had students in a room, one who was, economics, one who was politics, one who was education, one who was law, one who was an engineer, one who was a radio astronomer, whatever it is, what is it? What is the level of understanding, and what is the information? What is the knowledge? What are the skills that these students need to be able to walk away with to be able to work together? And so, that is how we have decided what to look at. So we are currently busy with this first master's level course. The other 2 go into production in the next 3 months. And then just one of the, the last projects that I wanted to talk about, and Scott alluded to this, the Broadband Map US. All of you in the room will know that, the FCC requests cellular providers to submit coverage data rates. That's not always very accurate. And, that there was this directive from Congress to the FCC to say, can we verify these broadband maps? And so this was a fantastic opportunity that we saw for education, for research, for training. And so Manisha Ghosh, who was originally at University of Chicago and is now at Notre Dame, created the capabilities and a pilot project for students to be able to take cell phones, an app on the cell phone, and actually be able to map precisely sort of what that broadband looks like in their immediate areas, and then taking that data and actually being able to feed it back to the carriers and the FCC. And so through this, we have actively engaged, and had 4 new minority serving institutions join us at SpectrumX. This project is going exceedingly well. We had these students with us for Spectrum Week last week, and some of them even blew T-Mobile away when they were cross-questioned at their posters. So it's been a fantastic project to have, really give students, this understanding, this appreciation, as well as a lot of hands-on work. So here really is an opportunity and our ask for you to get involved if you are interested in education and workforce development. If you would like to see more about what we're doing, or if you would like to join us in terms of the development of the work that we're doing, please get in touch with us. There's the link. There's also a QR code, or alternatively, you can pop me an email at this NRAO address, and we would love to work with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anja. We really appreciate it. We're coming back up onto the stage now, Scott and I. So we only have a few minutes left, but I do have a few questions, and certainly want to offer the chance to all of you to ask questions as well. Wanted to start with Scott. Ira Keltz from basically FCC earlier today highlighted really the role of really NSF's Spectrum Innovation Initiative and its importance to really bring together the regulatory community together with all of the research community, and talking about really the MOU which exists between FCC, NTIA, and basically NSF on this, and really trying to align priorities and basically areas of focus. But now that we're a few years into basically SpectrumX, how is that integration between sort of regulatory and research going? Recognizing that it's not a small challenge, but what have you been seeing in terms of the successes and challenges?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one of the interesting points is just having conversations between the SpectrumX researchers and the folks at the FCC and the NTIA. For example, last fall, we had an advisory board meeting here in Washington, and we had members of NTIA and FCC at that board meeting, talking to us about some of the challenges, some of the issues that we should be thinking about. Interestingly enough, NTIA has a real concern about workforce, and so that's been a constant thread and really helped to accelerate our effort in workforce. Some comments came up from the FCC. One of the ongoing challenges, which was interesting, is trying to understand if devices are being operated indoors or outdoors. That has an impact for policy making and regulatory decision making, which we hadn't really thought about. And so bringing the stakeholders together and having regular conversations allows us to provide guidance to our researchers about these are some of the interesting and challenging problems. We understand when things blow up in the media, right? When we're talking about the challenges with GPS, the challenges with radio altimeters, those things happen. And it's difficult for researchers to respond to that because that's almost too far downstream, right? So having these discussions, understand the ongoing challenges. There's a lot of discussions right now about the large space constellations. I know there was a discussion here, I think it was yesterday, on that topic, right? So we have people such as myself and other colleagues that are experienced in aerospace engineering, understand radio spectrum, and again trying to work with our colleagues at the FCC and the NTA to understand how can we contribute and leverage the horsepower that we have in the center.
So building on what Scott was just saying, Anja, and talking about some of what went on at really NSF Spectrum Week a few weeks back, I know that there was a really great session there which was talking about the interagency work specifically focused on workforce management. And I certainly remember the presentations by NASA as well as by DoD in terms of talking about their spectrum management workforce needs. However, could you speak a little bit more to that, Anja, and how you're really working together with really the interagency on this?
I think organically, originally sort of within their different silos, different agencies have all been trying to tackle this workforce issue. And so there have been different efforts which have grown organically within those agencies. But the wonderful thing that has started happening, through SpectrumX, and just being given that mandate to sort of reach out and work with other agencies, is being able to work with, for example, Shelley Frank at DoD, Karen Clothier, and the three working groups within NASA. And so what we've started seeing is this incredible partnership where, we will have NASA folks sitting in on our workforce development meetings, NTIA, ham radio operators, some DoD folks, and vice versa, where we are allowed to, or have been invited to NASA, Spectrum workforce meetings. and really sort of starting to build this community together where, because we have the same challenges, we may not be looking for exactly the same spectrum manager always, but so there's really been just great back and forth sharing of ideas, sharing of research, and sharing of materials.
Joe, do you are there questions from inside the audience, or one from you, Joe?
I do know one we had that this seems to dovetail very nicely with some discussions we had yesterday. One question that had been asked yesterday is, if we work to take some of our there's art and science here. There's a little bit of magic in spectrum management, but it does boil down to a little science too, or a lot of science. And there was a discussion around yesterday around workforce development. What would it take to create 50,000 spectrum managers? We had a group that had trained 400. That was a lot for them. We're the largest spectrum management group that we're aware of on the planet, and we have barely 770 members in our closed LinkedIn group. So, but there seems to be just a tremendous demand side curve. We keep hearing about this, and now we're hearing it again from your panel. We've heard it from multiple locations that there's just a huge need for spectrum management literacy. So I don't know what it would take for you guys to digest that concept of, let's say, over 3 years, educating 50,000 people, just as a bogey. What would that look like?
I mean, maybe I'll talk at one point, and Anja can follow up on it. I mean, I think it's an interesting thought experiment, right? How do we do that? I think, our approach is not to say, oh, we want to build this at institution X or institution Y. Our approach is to create materials and make them broadly available so that institutions can pick it up and run with it, right? So, I mean, if you look at institutions of higher education, they're running a business. They're nonprofit, but they're mostly nonprofit, but they're running a business just like anybody else is, right? So if you can make a strong business case and you can provide resources there to enable them, then they will pick that up and start offering those types of curricula to meet the need. So if there's a clear articulation of a need, if there are tools that enable people to go do that, then I firmly expect to see adoption, and I would expect to see that early in the SpectrumX institutions. But we understand that we essentially need to crowdsource this out to meet that kind of model. So it has to be scalable. It has to be something that can be shared to address the issue.
And then maybe some sort of certification and licensing, or if we offer that, it's something that can be picked up. So there's some quality control and uniformity of understanding for different modules.
Yeah, just a quick comment, and then I'll leave it to Anja. Engineering degree programs are accredited by EBET, so there is an official accreditation process. So obviously we don't do licensing, but students coming out of a program then could sit for an exam and then get licensed, like the professional engineering degree program. So I mean, I see it as a multi-stage process where there's education, and that can be followed by professional licensure through some professional organization. Great. So Anja, did you have comments?
Yeah, I think just on both of those things, 50,000 spectrum managers. My first thought goes to yes, absolutely, as much open source training material and hands-on opportunities as possible. But that takes money. We have clearly heard the call from industry, that they just don't have enough people. But that's going to need very close partnership, I think, between government, industry, NGOs, to really start looking at a model of, okay, how do we allow institutions to scale this kind of education, because faculty are overworked. So there's that aspect of things, but then also just in terms of certification, again, yes, we are looking at working with firstly the best in their fields, so we've managed to sort of nobble like the Tom Hazlets for economy and economics and that sort of thing. But for us, it's very much about, this is a certification, it's an entry level. What do people need to be in the room to be able to talk to each other and be able to work together? And as Scott said, there are opportunities for specializations, that already exist. We don't want to duplicate those. I had a look at the INATE certification, which I think was discussed yesterday, which is fantastic. So these opportunities already exist. There is specialized training material out there, but it's really sort of that entry level where we seem to be having difficulties. And I think also back to the 50,000 spectrum managers, we need to start training on the job. We're seeing that within radio astronomy. And I think we're starting to see it in industry as well, where you're just not going to have the perfect spectrum manager walking through your door anymore. And there's a lot of on-the-job training that's going to have to start happening sooner.
And just to follow up on that point, Anja, something that really resonated with me when you were talking about this at Spectrum Week, and what you were just saying is really thinking about those people who are going to engage in spectrum matters, who learn about it on the job. And that is very much me. I come from a policy background, much more from sort of science, weather, climate sort of background. And then I quickly realized, wow, I really do need to learn about spectrum matters. And really over the course of about 15 years, next thing I know, I'm now a member of the board of the National Spectrum Management Association, not because I did some specific certification, but just because I kind of had to learn along the way. And personally, I think that having some kind of short course, which is exactly what Anja is talking about in terms of sort of thinking about adapting it for people who have other specialties, but spectrum dependent specialties. And so I think that certainly broadening our focus, certainly as National Spectrum Management Association, to think in terms of not only people who are focusing their whole profession on spectrum management, even though I certainly understand that certainly a lot of the association has, however, recognizing that it's sort of a secondary role, a secondary skill for basically a lot of different